Good afternoon, evening, and night, ladies, gentlemen, and other folk. I have recently finished reading the first book of Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote. I figured that since Miguel spent a couple years between the first and second book, I could also take some time. And I have some other options that I've been wanting to read recently. All of the books that I'm going to be talking about today are definitely going to be considered historic. They're also all very important, not just in their own right, but also because they would help to shape a lot of other books and a lot of other work that would be done after them. Some of them are very long and would take me months or years to read the entirety of. Some of them are very short. I'm going to be going through them newest to oldest, with some of these books being so big and all of them being so important. Whatever I choose to read, it's going to give me a lot that I am going to work through, and it's going to show me a lot. So I do want to make sure that I make the right choice and that I can get some other opinions. The newest, and this is actually a series of books, is going to be the Federalist Papers. I have Glenn Beck's The Original Argument, The Federalist Papers, The Writings That Shaped the U.S. Constitution, edited by R.B. Bernstein, and I'll be going through them, of course, with a copy of the modern U.S. Constitution. The original Federalist Papers were by John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and John Adams. And the Federalist Papers were a big argument to support the Constitution against the anti Federalist. The Supreme Court still uses the Federalist Papers today in order to determine founders' intent when discussing constitutional matters. These papers were written in fairly simple to understand language, as opposed to what the Constitution would be written in or what Supreme Court rulings are. In the same era for America, but slightly earlier, is Common Sense. This was to support independence and also democracy, which was really an idea being rediscovered at the time. And this book would spread across the colonies like wildfire, and with the smoke rising would also be the American spirit that hadn't ever existed before this book. Thomas Paine was the original author, and the edition that I have is by Applewood Books. Moving from the shortest to the longest book in this collection is The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It is one of the most important books in the historiography of the Roman Empire. My copy is by Heritage Press, and it is authored by Edward Gibbon. This book is about the fall of the Roman Empire, but not just the Western Roman Empire. It goes all the way till 1453, which covers the medieval and ancient eras of Rome. This book comes in 3 volumes, number in the thousands of pages. The successor to the Western Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, was criticized by a certain Enlightenment philosopher who called it neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. This man was Voltaire, and he wrote the next book, The Candide. The edition I have is by Mint Editions. The Candide, as it says itself, follows its hero as he emerges from a sheltered life, where he understood everything happens for the best, into the world, where things are rarely so pleasant. A witty entertainment, saturated with satirical stabs at philosophy, religion, government, and humanity in general, Candide is a transformative classic and the author's finest work. Voltaire, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, as well as Thomas Paine, and even Edward Gibbon would base their political ideas off of John Locke. John Locke's most important contribution to politics was the idea of the social contract theory, which was the idea that the government got its power from the governed. Any power except the people was not legitimate. John Locke established these principles in his most influential work, Two Treatises on Government. Only a few years before Two Treatises on Government was finished, the second book of Don Quixote was. The edition that I have is translated by Tom Lathrop. However, the story of how the second book came into being is so interesting. The original book was published in 1605, and it was very common for other authors in that era to add on their own parts of the story. In 1614, a different author published a book, though. Miguel, in 1615, published the proper sequel to Don Quixote, and it was very vindictive. Don Quixote, the namesake of the book, is a Spanish knight errant who lives in an era where knights are no longer needed, but he still is crazy enough to try to make himself relevant through chivalric deeds. Though you may think that over 400 years is old, this is where we start to get into the actually ancient books, starting with Meditations by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and this is his personal diary. Because of this, it's not made for wide distribution and definitely not publication, so you get to see very personal things about his life, but also things that you can't see the full context of. I did call it a diary, but it's more of Marcus Aurelius's personal book about how he thinks one should live a virtuous life. The edition that I have is translated by A.S.L. Farpenhausen, and the introduction is by John Sellers. A collection of books such as this could never possibly be complete without Sun Tzu's Art of War. The translation that I have is by Ralph D. Sawyer. What this is, if you've never heard of it, is a Chinese martial manual and very often used as a joke. If you spend enough time online, you will absolutely see quotations from this book, some real, most not. What this book actually does, it does incredibly well, which is teach both broad ideas and specifics of Chinese military strategy. This book is both interesting from a historical point of view, as well as it can give you ideas about how to succeed in a complicated and conflicting environment. Now, we go all the way back to the very beginning of civilization, the Epic of Gilgamesh. My edition is published by Penguin Classics and translated by Andrew George. What this epic is a collection of various stories that were all compiled into one, and the oldest come from 3,700 years ago. It first appeared in ancient Babylon and Assyria in the first millennia BC as a compiled, complete story. The story follows Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. This is somewhat a commentary on society, like how Don Quixote is, but primarily it's just a narrative following a character. And that is the final book. I understand that there's not any Homer or many other works in here or figures that have influenced literature an incredible amount, but these are just the books that I actually have physical copies of. I understand that this has a somewhat Western focus, specifically with the United States, but there is still a lot of diversity in these books, that not just in the region and the culture, but also what they're trying to influence you on. So let's have a conversation about which of these books is the best, with as many different perspectives as we can get. Until next time, gentlemen and ladies, good night, evening, afternoon, or morning to you.